The dining room was so loud I could barely hear myself think. 27 people packed into my son's Atlanta house, laughing, clinking glasses, reaching across each other for second helpings of roast and potatoes. Extra tables shoved together, folding chairs squeezed in wherever they fit, the patio bench dragged inside because there weren't enough seats. Except there was one seat nobody wanted. Mine. They put me at the far end of the table, half hidden behind the swinging kitchen door and a tower of paper napkins. My place card looked like an afterthought, wedged between a bread basket and someone's purse. I could smell the coffee brewing on the counter behind me. My son Andrew barely looked up when he told me to sit there. "You like coffee, Mom," he said, carving the roast like he was doing me a favor. "My name is Judith Palmer. I'm 69 years old, and that New Year's Eve dinner was the moment I understood they had finished rewriting who I was in this family." I slid into my corner seat. Nobody helped me with my coat. Nobody asked if I wanted water or wine. I watched Andrew raise his glass at the head of the table, his wife Tara glowing beside him in sequins and lipstick so red it looked like a warning, and I realized I felt more like hired help than the woman who brought him into this world. Plates passed around me like I was furniture. Bowls of mashed potatoes went from cousin to uncle to neighbor and back again, skipping right over the empty space in front of me. I poured myself water from a sweating pitcher and swallowed the knot climbing up my throat. If you're watching this from somewhere warm tonight, maybe with family who actually see you, I hope you take a second to appreciate that. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. What time is it where you are? And if this story feels familiar, if you've ever been the invisible one at a table you helped set, hit that like button and subscribe, because you're going to want to see how this ends. Half an hour into dinner, the story started. "Man, this year was rough," Andrew announced, loud enough to carry over the noise of forks and laughter. "The economy, the business, and, responsibilities." He turned his head just slightly toward me, just enough that everyone else followed his gaze. "Having Mom move in," he continued, sighing like he was carrying the weight of the world, paying for her meds, her appointments. "We love you, Mom, but it's been a lot." A few relatives murmured sympathy. Someone at the other end muttered something about the burdens of elder care. I didn't correct him. There was no point telling them I paid for my own prescriptions, that Medicare and my supplemental coverage handled everything else. It didn't fit the story they wanted to believe. I might have swallowed it. I'd swallowed 100 other small cuts over the past 3 years. Little comments, subtle exclusions, the slow rewriting of history until I became the problem instead of the solution. But then Tara stood up. Her chair scraped back so hard the legs screeched against the hardwood. Conversations faded. She planted one manicured hand flat on the table, her other hand pointing straight at me like a prosecutor in front of a jury. "She's not family," Tara said, voice cutting through the sudden silence. "She's a burden." The room went dead quiet for one heartbeat. 27 faces turned toward me. I felt my pulse jump into my ears. Somewhere deep in my chest, that old familiar shame tried to flare up. The same shame I felt the first time a teacher sent a note home saying Andrew talked back in class. The same shame I felt when my ex-husband accused me of turning his son against him before he walked out. I felt it rising, and I refused it. "Tara," I said calmly, "you've had too much wine." Instead of backing down, she got louder. "No," she snapped. "Everyone tiptoes around this. You all act like she's some saint, but she drained us dry. She moved into our house, took over our time, our money, our lives. Andrew and I have sacrificed everything, and she just sits there like we owe her." My son cut in. For one wild second, I thought he would stop her. He didn't. "She's right," Andrew said, meeting my eyes across the table. "You have drained us, Mom. You have no idea what we've done to keep you comfortable. We invited you here so everyone could see what we're dealing with. You're always the victim in your version of the story." He lifted his glass again, like he was making another toast. "Let's be honest for once," he added. "Tell them how you guilt-tripped us into letting you move in. Tell them how you manipulated me into that business arrangement." Someone at the far end snickered. A cousin I used to babysit shook his head and muttered something under his breath. My daughter Kelly sat halfway down the table, silent, eyes glued to her plate. She hadn't looked at me once all night. Then Tara's mother started it. "Burden." she sang under her breath, just loud enough to be heard. Her sister joined in. Burden, burden. A few younger cousins laughed. And then, like it was a game instead of my life, the chant caught. Burden, burden, burden. It rolled down the table like a wave. People who barely knew my name mouthed the word over their second helpings of roast. I watched my son, the boy I once carried on my hip, lean back in his chair and let it happen. Someone stood up behind me. Kelly's chair scraped against the floor. "Come on, Mom," she muttered, voice tight and embarrassed. "You're making it weird. Let's get you home." Her hand closed around my elbow, not gently, like she was escorting someone unruly to the door. For a moment, I saw the whole scene from somewhere above myself. 27 relatives shouting about family while they shoved the oldest woman in the room out into the hallway with her coat half on. Andrew already turning back to his friends. Tara reaching for the gravy boat like she hadn't just put a knife through my chest. I could have cried. I could have screamed. I could have reminded them who stayed up sewing Halloween costumes and school play outfits, who worked double shifts so they could have summer camp and braces and gas money. Instead, I smiled. Kelly shoved my coat at me in the foyer. "They didn't mean it like that," she said quickly, glancing back toward the dining room like she was afraid someone would see her being kind. "They're just stressed." "I know exactly how they meant it," I said. The house pulsed with laughter behind us. I slid my arms into my coat, buttoned it all the way up, and stepped out into the cold night air. On the walkway, I unlocked my phone. Not to read the group messages, not to check the photos they were probably already posting. I opened my recent threads and scrolled to one contact saved under a single name, Garrison. No emoji, no last name, no description, just 6 letters. Our last message was from 3 days earlier. "If they cross the line again, you let me know. I can file everything on January 2nd. You won't owe them a warning." Standing in my son's driveway on New Year's Eve, I typed one word, Garrison. Then I hit send. That text wasn't an impulse. It wasn't panic or spite or anger talking. It was the trigger I'd been preparing for 6 months, waiting to pull only if they forced my hand. They had no idea what my signature could do, but they were about to find out. 3 years earlier, you would have found a very different version of me. I was sitting at my kitchen table in Dayton, Ohio, staring at a map of Georgia spread out in front of me while my son's voice poured through the speakerphone. "Mom, you shouldn't be alone up there," Andrew said, his tone warm and concerned. "You know how bad the winters have been. What if you slip on ice? What if something happens and nobody's around to help?" I looked around my kitchen. Same countertops I'd wiped down every morning for 23 years. Same window over the sink where I watched cardinals fight over the feeder. Same creaky floorboard by the stove that I'd learned to step over without thinking. My life was small, but it was mine. "I'm managing fine," I said, though even as the words left my mouth, I felt the weight of them. My knees had started complaining about the icy sidewalks. Shoveling the driveway was getting harder. My doctor had used the phrase, age in place, at my last checkup, and it had stuck with me in a way I didn't like. "Mom, listen," Andrew continued. "Tara and I have been talking. We have that in-law suite just sitting there. You could sell the house, move down to Atlanta, be near us, and the grandkids. No more worrying about snow. No more being alone if something goes wrong." I heard the click of him switching the phone to his other ear, the way he always did when he was getting serious. "You'd still have your independence," he added. "Your own space, but you'd be close, safe. Doesn't that sound better than rattling around in that big house by yourself?" I thought about my routines. Book club on Tuesdays, library volunteering on Wednesdays and Fridays, the knitting group that met at the community center, my friends, the ones who'd been through divorces and widowhood right alongside me. But I also thought about my grandkids. Video calls were fine, but they weren't the same as being there for soccer games and school plays. I thought about last Christmas, when I'd flown down for 4 days and spent half of it wishing I could stay longer. "Let me think about it," I said. "Of course," Andrew replied. "Take your time. But Mom, there's something else I wanted to run by you. A business opportunity." I straightened in my chair. Andrew had been running his home renovation company for 5 years. He talked about it constantly. Clients he was courting, projects he'd landed, the reputation he was building. "We're trying to get certified as a woman-owned business," he explained. "It opens up so many doors, government contracts, corporate partnerships, things we can't touch right now. But to qualify, we need a woman to own at least 51%. He paused. "I was thinking you could be that owner. On paper, you wouldn't have to do anything. I'd still run the day-to-day operations. But your name on the documents would help us grow. And if you're moving down here anyway, it makes sense, right? You'd be invested in our success." Literally. Something in my chest tightened, but I couldn't name it yet. "What would that involve?" I asked carefully. "Just some paperwork," he said, "and an investment, obviously. Nothing huge. Maybe 150, 200,000. You'd get it back as the business grows. Think of it as securing your own future while helping us build something real. $200,000. I had sold my house after the divorce and lived modestly ever since. Between that sale and careful saving, I had about $260,000 in the bank. It was supposed to carry me through retirement, through whatever came next. "Andrew, that's almost everything I have," I said slowly. "I know, Mom, and I wouldn't ask if I didn't believe in this. But think about it. You moved down here, you're part of the family business, you're near the grandkids. It all ties together. You're not just giving me money, you're investing in all of us. Over the next 2 weeks, he called every few days. Never pushy, always gentle. He sent photos of the in-law suite, freshly painted, with new curtains Tara had picked out. He sent videos of the grandkids asking when Grandma was coming to live nearby. Kelly called too. "I think it's a good idea, Mom," she said. "You've been talking about feeling isolated. This way, you're close to both of us. And Andrew's business is doing really well. He wouldn't ask if he didn't think it was solid." I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe that my son saw me as a partner, not a wallet. That moving closer meant being included, not becoming dependent. In the end, I said yes. The house sold faster than I expected. A young couple with a baby on the way fell in love with the backyard. I signed the papers in early November, walked away with $260,000, and started packing my life into boxes. By Thanksgiving, I was standing in Andrew's driveway in Atlanta with a moving truck idling behind me. He met me at the door with a hug that felt genuine. "Welcome home, Mom," he said. That first week felt like proof I'd made the right choice. The grandkids ran in and out of my suite like it was an extension of their playroom. Tara asked me to help plan a dinner party. Andrew brought me coffee in the mornings and asked about my day. On the 8th day, he brought me a folder. "Business stuff," he said, setting it on my small kitchen table. "Just need your signature on a few things to get you officially registered as owner." I opened the folder. Pages and pages of documents. Dense paragraphs of legal language, sections highlighted in yellow where I was supposed to sign. "It's a lot," I said, scanning the first page. "It's just structure," Andrew said, pulling a chair up next to me. "This one says you're the majority owner. This one registers the business with the state. This one is for the bank so they know who's in charge." He flipped through the pages quickly, pointing to signature lines, handing me a pen. I hesitated on one page. The phrase, "responsible party," stood out, bolded and underlined. "What does this mean?" I asked, finger hovering over the words. Andrew barely glanced at it. "Just legal terminology," he said. "It means you're the one making decisions. You're the majority owner, so you're responsible for approving big moves. It's a good thing, Mom. It means you have control." I wanted to ask more questions. I wanted to take the folder to someone who could explain it in plain language. But Andrew was smiling at me like I was doing something important, and I didn't want to seem like I didn't trust him. So I signed every page he pointed to, every line he highlighted. When I handed the folder back, he squeezed my shoulder. "You're officially a business owner now," he said. "Welcome to the team." That night, I sat in my new suite, looking around at the unfamiliar walls, the furniture I hadn't picked, the window that faced the neighbor's fence instead of my old bird feeder. I told myself this was the start of something good, a safe, family-centered chapter, a chance to be part of something bigger than my quiet life in Dayton. But as I lay in bed, I kept thinking about that phrase, responsible party. I didn't know yet what I'd just made myself responsible for, but I was about to find out. The first 3 months felt like everything I'd hoped for. My suite had a little kitchenette, but I spent most mornings in the main house. The grandkids would burst through my door before school, backpacks half-zipped, looking for their shoes or their homework, or just a hug before the bus came. I'd sit with them at the kitchen table while Tara rushed around getting ready for work and Andrew gulped coffee between phone calls. Sunday dinners became my thing. I'd spend Saturday afternoon shopping for ingredients, then Sunday morning prepping a roast or a casserole or whatever the kids had requested. The whole family would gather around the table, and for a few hours it felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. When the grocery bills started adding up, I didn't mind. That's what grandmothers do, I told myself. You help where you can. I paid for the kids' soccer registration when Tara mentioned it was due. I bought new cleats when the old ones got too tight. I picked up school supplies in August, winter coats in November, birthday presents that Andrew said they couldn't quite swing that month. "You're a lifesaver, Mom," he'd say, and I'd feel useful. But somewhere around month 4, the language started to shift. "It's expensive having another adult in the house," Tara said one morning, not looking up from her phone. "Utilities, groceries, everything costs more." I was standing at the stove making pancakes. The kids were still asleep. I turned to look at her, spatula in hand. "I'm happy to contribute more," I said carefully. She waved a hand like I'd missed the point. "It's not about you contributing," she said. "It's just the reality. 3 adults, 2 kids. Everything adds up." Andrew echoed the same theme a few days later when I offered to take everyone out for dinner. "That'd be great, Mom," he said. "We're stretched pretty thin this month. Having you here is worth it, but it's definitely a financial adjustment." I paid for dinner. Then I paid again the next week. And the week after that, it became an unspoken rule. When we went out, I picked up the tab. To say thank you, I told myself, for letting me live here, for including me. But the math was starting to bother me. I started keeping a mental tally. Not because I wanted to throw it in anyone's face, but because I needed to understand what was happening. Groceries every week, roughly $120. Sports fees for both kids, $300 in the fall, another $250 in the spring. School clothes, supplies, field trip money, close to $600 over the course of the year. Restaurant tabs, $40 here, $60 there, sometimes $120 when we brought extended family. A new washing machine when theirs broke, $800, which Andrew promised to pay me back for but never did. Tara's car insurance when she got behind, $430. A temporary loan to cover payroll when the business had a slow month, $2,000. Another loan a month later, $1,500. And another, $3,000. This time with Andrew saying the state was being difficult about some filing and he needed cash to smooth things over. I wasn't writing checks blindly. I asked questions. Andrew always had answers that sounded reasonable in the moment. The business was growing. Clients were slow to pay. This was just how small businesses worked. Once they landed the next big contract, everything would level out. I wanted to believe him. I also wanted to believe that I wasn't being taken advantage of, that my son saw me as family and not a convenient source of emergency funding. But I kept noticing things. Andrew bought a new truck in February. Not used, new. He said it was a business expense, that clients expected a certain image. Tara posted photos of it on social media with the caption, "Blessed." In March, they remodeled the kitchen. New cabinets, new countertops, a fancy refrigerator with a screen on the front. I asked if business was doing better. "We're investing in the house," Andrew said. "It's an asset. You understand assets, right, Mom?" I understood that I was living in a suite attached to a house that was getting prettier while I was being told every month how expensive I was to maintain. In April, the first letter came. It was a thick envelope from the state of Georgia, Department of Revenue. My name was printed on the front in that impersonal block font government offices use. I opened it standing in my kitchenette, still holding my car keys because I'd just gotten back from the library. Notice of delinquent payroll tax deposits. I read the first paragraph twice before the words sank in. Palmer Home Renovations had failed to submit payroll taxes for the previous quarter. As the registered majority owner, I was being notified that the business owed $6,342, plus interest accruing daily. If payment was not received within 30 days, the state could pursue collection action against the responsible party. My name was listed under responsible party in bold letters. I sat down on my couch, the letter shaking slightly in my hands. This had to be a mistake. Andrew handled the business side. He told me I was just a figurehead, that my name on the paperwork was for certification purposes. I didn't run payroll. I didn't touch the bank accounts. I didn't make decisions about when taxes got paid. But the letter didn't care about any of that. It cared about whose name was on the state filings. Mine. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. Then I walked across the yard to the main house. Andrew was in his office, door half open, talking on the phone about a bathroom remodel. I stood in the doorway and waited. When he hung up, he looked at me and smiled. "Hey, Mom. What's up?" I handed him the envelope. He opened it, scanned the contents, and his face didn't change at all. "Oh, that," he said, tossing it onto his desk like it was junk mail. "It's just a timing thing. I'll get it sorted." "A timing thing?" I repeated. "Andrew, this says the state is going to come after me if it's not paid." "It's not going to come to that," he said, already turning back to his computer. "I've got it under control." "Then why is my name on this notice?" He sighed, the kind of sigh that said I was being difficult. "Because you're the majority owner, Mom. That's how it works. But I handle the actual finances. Don't worry about it." I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized he believed what he was saying. He genuinely thought this was fine. That night, I lay awake rereading the letter. The phrases jumped out at me like warning signs I should have seen months ago. Responsible party. Interest accruing daily. Collection action. I had trusted my son with my savings, my name, my future, and I was starting to understand that trust and protection were not the same thing. I confronted Andrew the next morning. He was in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a travel mug, already dressed for a job site. I walked in with the tax notice in my hand, the envelope now wrinkled from how many times I'd taken it out and put it back in during the night. "We need to talk about this," I said, setting it on the counter between us. He glanced at it without picking it up. "I told you, Mom. It's just a timing issue. The accountant messed up the filing dates. I'll handle it." "When?" I asked. "When what?" "When will you handle it? There's a deadline on this, Andrew. 30 days. And it says interest is adding up every single day." He screwed the lid onto his mug and looked at me with the kind of patience you use on someone who doesn't understand how the world works. "I've been running this business for years," he said. "This stuff happens all the time. The state sends scary letters to get you to pay faster. It's a tactic. I'll pay it before it becomes a real problem." "But my name is on it," I said, hearing my voice go quieter than I wanted. "If you don't pay it, they come after me." "They're not going to come after you," he said, grabbing his keys. "You're worrying over nothing." He left through the garage door before I could say anything else. I stood there holding the letter, feeling the weight of those words. "You're worrying over nothing." Maybe he was right. Maybe this was normal. Maybe I was overreacting because I didn't understand business. But that night, lying in bed, I kept reading the same phrases over and over. Responsible owner. Interest accruing daily. Collection action against the responsible party. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't a business expert. But I knew what those words meant in plain language. If this didn't get paid, the state didn't care who actually ran the company. They cared whose name was on the paperwork. And that name was mine. The next Wednesday, I went to the library, like I always did. I'd been volunteering there since my second week in Atlanta, shelving books and helping patrons find what they needed. It was the one place that still felt like mine, where I wasn't somebody's mother or somebody's burden or somebody's convenient signature. I was restocking the community bulletin board when I saw the flyer. Free seminar, Understanding Small Business Risk and Owner Liability. It was printed on bright yellow paper, the kind that's supposed to catch your attention. The date was that Saturday. The location was the public library 2 towns over. No registration required. I stood there staring at it. I told myself I was just curious, that I wanted to understand the paperwork better, that it didn't mean I didn't trust Andrew. It just meant I wanted to be informed. I took a photo of the flyer with my phone. Saturday morning, I told Tara I was going to visit a friend. It wasn't exactly a lie. I just didn't specify that the friend was a legal seminar. The library meeting room was about half full when I arrived. Folding chairs arranged in rows, a small podium at the front, a projector screen showing the title slide. Most of the attendees looked like me. Older, uncertain. People who'd probably signed things they didn't fully understand and were starting to worry about it. A man walked to the front just as the clock hit 10. He was maybe in his early 50s, wearing a suit but no tie, glasses perched on his nose. He moved like someone who was used to being listened to but didn't need to demand it. "Good morning," he said. "My name is Garrison Webb. I'm a business attorney here in Atlanta, and I spend a lot of my time helping people get out of situations they didn't know they were in." He clicked to the next slide. "Today we're going to talk about something that sounds boring but can ruin your life if you're not careful. Owner liability. Specifically, what happens when your name is on business documents, but you're not the one making decisions." My stomach tightened. He walked us through examples: a woman who co-signed on her son's LLC and ended up responsible for his unpaid vendor bills, a man who let his brother list him as a partner and got sued when the business failed, a retiree who invested in her daughter's startup and lost everything when the company went under owing back taxes. Every single story sounded like a version of something that could happen to me. "The state doesn't care who's running the day-to-day operations," Garrison said, his voice calm but firm. "They care who's on the filings. If your name is listed as the majority owner, the responsible party, the managing member, whatever the title is, you are the one they're going to come to first." He paused and looked around the room. "And if you sign documents without understanding them, that doesn't protect you. Ignorance isn't a legal defense. What matters is what you agreed to on paper." I felt my hands go cold. After the seminar ended, people started filing out. I stayed in my seat, staring at the tax notice I'd brought with me, now folded in my purse. Garrison was packing up his laptop at the front. A few people had lined up to ask him questions. I waited until they finished, then walked up to the podium. "Excuse me," I said. He looked up and smiled, the kind of smile that was professional but not unkind. "Yes?" I pulled out the letter and handed it to him. "I think I might be in trouble," I said. He unfolded it, read the first few lines, and his expression shifted just slightly, not alarmed, just focused. "May I ask how you ended up as the responsible party for this business?" he said. "My son," I said. "He asked me to invest. He said my name on the paperwork would help him get certified as a woman-owned company. He told me it was just structure." Garrison folded the letter back up and handed it to me. "Do you have copies of the documents you signed?" he asked. "Some of them," I said. "He has the originals." "I'd like to review what you have," he said. "And I'd like to pull the state filings to see exactly what your legal position is. Would you be willing to meet at my office?" I hesitated. "I don't want to cause problems," I said. "He's my son. I don't want to accuse him of anything." Garrison's face softened just a little. "I'm not here to create family drama," he said. "But if your name is on those forms and the business isn't paying its taxes, the state is going to come to you. Not your son, you. And if that happens, your retirement, your savings, everything you've worked for could be at risk." He pulled a business card from his pocket and handed it to me. "Think about it," he said. "But don't think too long. Interest accrues daily, like the letter says. And once the state files a lien, it gets a lot harder to fix." I took the card. It was simple. White background, black text, his name, his phone number, an address in Midtown Atlanta. I left the library holding that card in one hand and the tax notice in the other, feeling like the ground beneath me had just shifted in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't worrying over nothing. I was standing on a fault line I hadn't created, and I had no idea how deep the crack went. But I was about to find out. I waited 3 days before I called the number on the card. I told myself I was just gathering information, that understanding the paperwork didn't mean I was going behind Andrew's back, that a good mother protects herself so she can keep being there for her family. The lies we tell ourselves to avoid hard truths. Garrison's office was in a building downtown, the kind with marble floors in the lobby and a directory listing law firms and accountants and consulting groups. I rode the elevator to the 8th floor, feeling like I was doing something I'd have to explain later. His assistant led me to a conference room with a long table and windows overlooking the city. Garrison was already there, a stack of folders in front of him, reading glasses pushed up on his head. "Mrs. Palmer," he said, standing to shake my hand. "Thank you for coming." I sat down across from him, my purse in my lap like a shield. "I brought the documents I have," I said, pulling out a folder. "It's not everything. Andrew kept most of the originals." Garrison opened the folder and started reading. I watched his face, looking for reactions, but he kept his expression neutral, professional. After a few minutes, he looked up. "I pulled the state filings for Palmer Home Renovations," he said. "You're listed as owning 51% of the company. Your son owns 49%. That makes you the majority stakeholder and the primary responsible party for all debts, taxes, and legal obligations." "But I don't run anything," I said. "I don't make decisions. I don't even have access to the bank accounts." "That doesn't matter to the state," Garrison said gently. "What matters is what's on paper. And on paper, you're in charge." He slid a document across the table. "This is the operating agreement you signed. See this section here? It says the majority owner is responsible for ensuring compliance with all tax filings and financial obligations. That's you." I stared at the words, remembering the day Andrew had guided me through the signatures. "Just structure," he'd said. "Just legal terminology." "I also want you to meet someone," Garrison said. He stood and opened the conference room door. A woman walked in, maybe in her 40s, carrying a laptop and a leather portfolio. She had the brisk, efficient energy of someone who dealt in numbers and didn't waste time. "This is Rebecca Dobbins," Garrison said. "She's a forensic accountant. I asked her to take a look at your situation." Rebecca sat down next to Garrison and opened her laptop. "Mrs. Palmer," she said, "I'm going to walk you through what I found. Some of this might be difficult to hear, but I need you to understand exactly where your money went." She turned the laptop so I could see the screen. A spreadsheet filled with numbers, dates, transactions. "You invested $180,000 into Palmer Home Renovations 3 years ago," Rebecca said. "That money was supposed to go toward growing the business, equipment, materials, hiring employees, things that would increase revenue." She clicked to the next screen. "Instead, here's where it actually went." My stomach dropped as she went through the list. $60,000 toward a commercial office build-out that Andrew didn't need because most of his work was on job sites. $25,000 for 2 company vehicles, both of which were registered in Andrew's and Tara's names and used as personal cars. $30,000 in owner draws paid directly to Andrew and Tara over the course of 18 months. $15,000 on equipment that was later sold at a loss when Andrew decided to focus on different types of projects. The rest had disappeared into general operating expenses, covering gaps caused by the fact that Andrew kept underbidding jobs to win contracts and then couldn't cover his costs. "What about the payroll taxes?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Rebecca pulled up another document. "He's been skipping payroll deposits for almost a year," she said. "He pays the employees their wages, but he doesn't submit the taxes to the state. That's why you got the notice. And it's not just 1 quarter. It's 4. The total owed right now is close to $18,000. I felt the room tilt slightly. "And if it doesn't get paid?" I asked. Garrison leaned forward. "The state can put a lien on any assets tied to the business," he said. "That includes your personal assets. If they determine you benefited from the income, they can garnish your Social Security. They can freeze your bank accounts. They can come after your retirement savings." "But I didn't benefit," I said. "I've been paying into this family, not taking from it." "I know," Garrison said, "but proving that in court takes time and money. And in the meantime, you're still on the hook." Rebecca closed her laptop and looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "Your son has been running this business like a personal ATM," she said, "and because your name is on everything, you're the one holding the liability." I sat there trying to process what I was hearing. For 3 years, I'd listened to Andrew talk about how expensive it was to support me, how much of a sacrifice he and Tara were making, how I should be grateful they'd taken me in. And the entire time, I was the one keeping them afloat. My money had paid for their expansions, their vehicles, their remodel, their lifestyle, and when the bills came due, my name was the one on the notices. If you've ever been in a situation where someone rewrote the story to make you the villain, drop a comment below. Tell me how you realize the truth. And if you're still watching, hit that subscribe button, because this story is just getting started. You're going to want to see what happens when someone finally stops carrying the weight. Garrison pulled another folder from his stack. I want to show you some options, he said. Ways to protect yourself going forward. He opened the folder and laid out 3 documents. First option, he said, you demand full transparency. Access to all accounts, all filings, all financial records. You start monitoring everything and hold your son accountable for every dollar. I thought about how Andrew had reacted when I questioned the tax notice, the irritation, the dismissal. He won't agree to that, I said. Then option 2, Garrison continued. You separate your personal finances completely. Open new accounts at a different bank. Reroute your pension and Social Security. Cancel any cards he has access to. Make it clear that your money and his business are no longer connected. That still leaves me liable for what's already happened, I said. It does, Garrison agreed. Which brings us to option 3. He slid the 3rd document toward me. You sell your controlling interest to a more stable company, he said. There are firms that specialize in buying out troubled businesses, bringing in proper management, cleaning up the mess. You'd get some of your investment back over time, and more importantly, you'd transfer the liability off your name. I stared at the document. That would mean taking the company away from Andrew, I said. Garrison didn't sugarcoat it. Yes, he said. It would. I looked out the window at the city below. People going about their lives, unaware of the quiet disasters happening in conference rooms just like this one. I need to think about it, I said. Of course, Garrison replied. But Mrs. Palmer, I need you to understand something. If this company keeps operating the way it has been, it's going to collapse. And when it does, the creditors and the state are going to come to you first. Not your son. You. I picked up the documents and put them back in my purse. How long do I have? I asked. To decide? Garrison said. As long as you need. To protect yourself? Not much longer. I stood up, shook both their hands, and walked out of that office, carrying the weight of a choice I'd never wanted to make. Protect my son and risk losing everything. Or protect myself and accept what that would cost. I wasn't ready to decide yet, but the idea had landed. And it wasn't going away. I started small. The morning after my meeting with Garrison, I drove to a bank on the other side of town. Not the one Andrew used. Not the one where the teller knew my name and asked about the grandkids. A different bank entirely. I opened a new checking account and a new savings account. The banker asked routine questions about transfers and direct deposits, and I answered them feeling like I was planning an escape I hadn't fully committed to yet. I'd like to reroute my pension and Social Security, I said. Of course, she replied, sliding the forms across the desk. We can set that up today. My hands shook slightly as I filled out the paperwork. This felt like a betrayal, even though I knew logically it wasn't. I was just separating what was mine from what was his. That's what responsible adults did. That's what I should have done from the beginning. But it still felt like I was preparing for war in a family that was supposed to be at peace. The direct deposits would switch over at the start of next month. Until then, everything would continue flowing into the old account, the one Andrew had always been able to see. The one where he'd watched my pension arrive every month like clockwork and known exactly how much cushion I had to pull from when he needed it. Next, I called the credit card company. I'd like to cancel an authorized user, I said. The representative asked for the name. I gave her Andrew's information, my voice steady even though my heart wasn't. May I ask why you're removing this user? She asked. I'm simplifying my finances, I said, which was true, just not the whole truth. Done, she said a moment later. The card in his name will be deactivated within 24 hours. I hung up and sat in my car in the bank parking lot, staring at my phone. One account opened, one rerouted, one card canceled. Small steps, quiet steps, steps that would protect me even if I never had to use the nuclear option Garrison had laid out. That afternoon, I went back to Garrison's office. He was expecting me. I want to move forward with option 2, I said, separating my finances completely. But I also want to know more about option 3, just in case. Garrison nodded and pulled out a legal pad. "Smart," he said. "Let's start with the separation. You've already opened new accounts?" "This morning," I said. "Good. Now we need to formalize your position as majority owner. You're going to request full access to the company's financial records. Bank statements, tax filings, vendor contracts, everything. As the 51% owner, you're entitled to that information." "Andrew's not going to like that," I said. "Probably not," Garrison agreed. "But he doesn't get to decide. You're not asking for permission. You're exercising your legal rights." He started drafting a letter right there, his pen moving across the page in quick, confident strokes. "We'll send this via certified mail," he said. "It requests copies of all financial documents within 10 business days. If he refuses, we can compel production through the courts. But most people comply once they realize you're serious." I watched him write, feeling something shift inside me. For 3 years, I'd been apologizing for taking up space, for costing money, for being a burden, and the entire time, I'd been the one holding the power. I just hadn't known it. The letter went out on a Wednesday. Andrew got it on Friday. I was in my suite making tea when I heard his truck pull into the driveway, the engine cutting off with more force than usual. His footsteps pounded across the yard. My door flew open without a knock. "What is this?" he demanded, waving the letter in the air. I set my tea down carefully and turned to face him. "It's a request for financial records," I said calmly. "I'm the majority owner. I'm entitled to see how the company is being run." His face went red. "You're entitled?" he repeated, his voice climbing. "Since when do you make demands about my business?" "It's not your business," I said, and I was surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "It's our business, mine and yours, and according to the state, I own 51% of it." "This is because of that lawyer, isn't it?" Andrew said, pacing my small living room like a caged animal. "Some stranger convinced you I'm cheating you. This is exactly what I was afraid of. You're letting outsiders turn you against your own family." "No one turned me against anyone," I said. "I got a letter from the state saying I owe $18,000 in back taxes. I wanted to understand why. That's all. I told you I'd handle it." "You did tell me that," I agreed. "But you didn't handle it. And now there's interest adding up every day, and my name is the one on the notices." He stopped pacing and stared at me. "I can't believe you're doing this," he said. "After everything we've done for you. We brought you into our home, gave you a place to live, included you in everything. And this is how you repay us? By sicking lawyers on me?" I felt that old familiar guilt try to rise up, the instinct to smooth things over, to apologize, to make him feel better even when I was the one who'd been wronged. I pushed it down. "I'm not sicking anyone on you," I said. "I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." "By threatening me? By asking to see records I have a legal right to see," I corrected. "If there's nothing to hide, then showing me the documents shouldn't be a problem." His jaw tightened. "You don't trust me," he said. "I trusted you when I signed those papers," I said. "I trusted you when I invested my savings. I trusted you every time you said things were fine, and I shouldn't worry. And now I have a tax bill with my name on it, and I'm still hearing that I shouldn't worry. So no, Andrew. Right now, I don't trust you to protect my interests. I'm going to do that myself." He looked at me like I was a stranger. "This isn't you," he said. "This is that lawyer talking. This is me finally understanding what I signed," I replied. We stood there in silence for a long moment. I could see him trying to find the angle that would make me back down, the words that would guilt me into retreating. He didn't find them. "Fine," he said finally, his voice cold. "You want the records? I'll send you the records. But don't come crying to me when you realize you've destroyed this family over paperwork you don't even understand." He turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him hard enough that the frame rattled. I sat down on my couch, my hands shaking now that he was gone. That was the first time I'd ever stood up to my son like that. The first time I'd claimed the power my signature had given me, and it was terrifying. But it was also the first time in 3 years I'd felt like I was standing on solid ground. 2 days later, Garrison called. "I wanted to give you an update," he said. "I've been in contact with a company called Northside Build Group. They specialize in taking over struggling renovation businesses, bringing in proper management, cleaning up the books. And they'd be interested in Palmer home renovations? I asked. Potentially, he said. They'd want to review the financials first, but if the numbers make sense, they'd be willing to purchase your controlling interest and restructure the company. Your son could stay on as a salaried employee if he wanted, but he wouldn't be in charge anymore. I closed my eyes, imagining that conversation, imagining telling Andrew that I'd sold the company out from under him. What would I get out of it? I asked. They'd pay you over time, Garrison explained. Probably not the full $180,000, but a significant portion, and more importantly, they'd take on the liability. The tax debt, the vendor bills, all of it would transfer to them. Your name would come off the state filings. So I'd be free, I said quietly. You'd be protected, Garrison clarified. Free is a different question. I thanked him and hung up. I didn't tell him yes. I didn't tell him no. But I didn't tell him to stop exploring the option either, because I was starting to realize that sometimes protecting yourself means making choices that other people will call selfish. And sometimes that's the only way to survive. 3 weeks after I sent the document request, Andrew finally delivered the records. He dropped a cardboard box on my doorstep without knocking. I heard his truck pull away before I even got to the door. Inside were bank statements, tax forms, vendor invoices, all stuffed into manila folders with no organization or explanation. It took me 2 days to sort through everything. Then I took the box to Garrison's office. Rebecca, the forensic accountant, spent a week reviewing the contents. When she finished, she called me in for a meeting. "It's worse than I thought," she said, sliding a summary across the conference table. "The payroll tax issue isn't isolated. He's behind on quarterly estimated taxes, sales tax remittances, and workers' comp premiums. Combined total is close to $34,000. I felt the air leave my lungs. And he's still taking owner draws? I asked. Every month? Rebecca confirmed. He's paying himself $4,500 a month while owing the state $34,000. That's not cash flow problems. That's priorities. Garrison leaned forward, his expression serious. Mrs. Palmer, I need to be very direct with you. If this continues, the state will eventually come after your personal assets, your pension, your savings, anything with your name attached. And once that happens, stopping it becomes exponentially harder. What about Northside? I asked. Did they review the numbers? Garrison nodded. They did, and they're willing to move forward, but only under specific conditions. He pulled out a folder and opened it in front of me. Northside Build Group will assume control of Palmer Home renovations, he said. They'll bring in their own management team, implement their systems, pay off the outstanding debts, and operate the company under their oversight. Over the next 5 years, they'll buy out your ownership stake in incremental payments. You won't get the full $180,000 back, but you'll recover about 60%, and you'll be completely shielded from any future liability. What happens to Andrew? I asked. He'd be offered a position as a salaried project manager, Garrison said. He'd still work in the business, but he wouldn't run it. He wouldn't have access to the finances. He'd show up, do the job, get paid, and go home, like any other employee. I tried to imagine Andrew agreeing to that, working for someone else in a company he'd built, taking orders instead of giving them. He'd never accept it, I said. Probably not, Garrison agreed. But that's his choice to make. You're not responsible for how he reacts to consequences he created. He pulled out another document. There's one catch, he said. Northside won't move forward while your son has any control. So before they finalize anything, you'd need to sign corporate resolutions removing Andrew and Tara from their officer positions and authorizing the future sale of your controlling interest. I stared at the document in front of me. 2 signatures. That's all it would take. Once I sign this, there's no going back? I asked. Not exactly, Garrison said. I can hold these documents and not file them until you give me explicit permission. Think of it as an insurance policy. If things improve, if your son starts operating responsibly, you never have to use it. But if things get worse, if he crosses a line you can't forgive, you have an immediate way to protect yourself. I picked up the papers and read through them slowly. Legal language that boiled down to 2 simple facts. Andrew Palmer and Tara Palmer are hereby removed from all officer positions within Palmer Home Renovations, effective upon filing. Judith Palmer, as majority owner, authorizes the sale of controlling interest to Northside Build Group under terms previously negotiated. My hands started shaking. I thought about Andrew as a little boy, the way he used to run to me when he scraped his knee, absolutely certain I could fix anything. The way he'd climb into my lap during thunderstorms, burying his face in my shoulder while I told him he was safe. I thought about the first time I bailed him out. He was 19, dropped out of college, got behind on rent. I'd written a check and told myself it was a one-time thing, that he just needed help getting back on his feet. I thought about all the times after that. The car payment I covered when he lost a job, the credit card bill I paid when he overspent during the holidays, the business loan I co-signed when the bank wouldn't approve him on his own. I'd been cleaning up his mistakes for 30 years. And every single time, I'd told myself I was helping. That's what mothers do. They catch their children when they fall. But there's a difference between catching someone and letting them use you as a landing pad over and over again while they refuse to learn how to stop falling. Garrison must have seen something in my face. "This isn't about punishment," he said gently. "This is about protection. You're not sabotaging your son. You're refusing to let him take you down with him." I looked up at him. "If I sign this and he finds out, he'll never forgive me," I said. "Maybe not," Garrison replied. "But if you don't sign it and you lose everything, will you forgive yourself?" I sat there for a long time, the pen heavy in my hand. I thought about that tax notice, about the chant at the dinner table, about Kelly's hand on my elbow, pushing me toward the door while 27 people called me a burden. I thought about the spreadsheet Rebecca had shown me, my money traced through a business that treated me like an ATM while calling me dead weight. I thought about what would happen if I did nothing, if I just kept trusting, kept hoping, kept believing that Andrew would eventually see what he was doing and change. The state would come for me, creditors would come for me, and when I had nothing left, Andrew would still be telling people I was the problem. I picked up the pen. My hand hovered over the signature line for what felt like an eternity. Then I signed. Once on the first resolution, once on the second, I set the pen down and slid the documents back across the table to Garrison. "I need you to promise me something," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "What's that?" "Don't file these unless I explicitly tell you to," I said. "I need to know I tried everything else first. I need to know I gave him every chance to make this right." Garrison nodded and placed the signed documents into a folder, then into his briefcase. "I won't file anything without your direct instruction," he said. "But Mrs. Palmer, if they cross your line again, don't wait. Don't second-guess yourself. Don't give them time to do more damage. You text me, and I'll take care of the rest." "Just text you?" I asked. "Just my name," he said. "That's all it takes. I'll know what it means." I stood up, my legs unsteady. I'd just signed away my son's control over a company I'd funded. I'd just authorized a sale that would strip him of the identity he'd built around being a business owner. And he had no idea. I walked out of that office carrying a weight I hadn't had when I walked in. The weight of a loaded gun I was hoping I'd never have to fire, but the safety was off, and my finger was on the trigger. All I needed was one more reason to pull it. The weeks that followed felt like living in a house made of glass. Everything looked normal on the surface. Sunday dinners continued. The kids still ran through my suite looking for lost toys. Andrew still asked me to watch them when he and Tara had date nights. But underneath, the foundation had cracked, and we were all pretending not to notice. Andrew never mentioned the document request again. He delivered the box of records and then acted like the whole thing had never happened. He was polite when we crossed paths. Distant, but polite, like I was a tenant he had to tolerate instead of his mother. Tara stopped asking me to help with dinner parties. The grandkids still visited, but there was a new instruction I overheard Tara giving them one afternoon. "Don't ask Grandma for money, okay? She's on a fixed income now." Fixed income. Like I'd suddenly become poor instead of simply stopping the flow of cash they'd gotten used to. I didn't correct her. I just watched. Late November, Andrew started talking about a New Year's Eve dinner. "We're doing it big this year," he announced at Sunday dinner. his voice full of the old confidence I remembered from before the tax notices and the lawyers. 25, maybe 30 people. Family, friends, some potential clients. It's good for business to show we're doing well. I looked up from my plate. How many people? I asked. 27, if everyone says yes, Tara said, scrolling through her phone. We'll need to rent extra tables. Maybe get the patio furniture out of storage. I thought about the $34,000 in unpaid taxes, about the vendor invoices Rebecca had shown me, the ones marked past due in red. That sounds expensive, I said carefully. Tara's head snapped up. We can afford it, she said, her tone sharp. I'm just saying, with everything going on with the business. The business is fine, Andrew cut in. We landed a big contract last month. We're celebrating. This is how you build reputation. You show up strong. I didn't argue. I just went back to my meal and made a mental note. They were spending money they didn't have to impress people who didn't matter. And they were doing it while still owing the state. Over the next few weeks, I watched the preparations unfold. Imported cheeses arrived in boxes marked with fancy logos, cases of wine stacked up in the garage. Tara hired someone to deep clean the house, to polish the floors until they gleamed, to make everything look perfect for the photos she was already planning. One afternoon, I found her in the kitchen, arranging sample appetizers on serving platters. This must be costing a fortune, I said, not accusingly, just observing. She didn't look up. You don't need to worry about our finances, she said. We've got it handled. I wasn't worrying, I replied, just making conversation. Well, don't, she said, and there was an edge in her voice that hadn't been there before. You've made it very clear you don't trust us, so maybe just stay out of it. I left the kitchen without another word. But I noticed she'd ordered steaks from a specialty butcher. I noticed the champagne had French labels. I noticed the invitations she'd printed on thick cardstock with gold lettering. This wasn't a dinner. It was a performance. And I was starting to realize I was part of the set design, not the cast. Kelly came by one Saturday in early December. She was picking up the kids after a sleepover, and I offered her coffee while they gathered their things. We sat at my small kitchen table, the conversation stiff and careful. Andrew says you hired a lawyer, she said finally, not meeting my eyes. I consulted with one, I corrected. About the business documents I signed. He feels like you're going behind his back. I'm protecting myself, I said. There's a difference. Kelly stirred her coffee, the spoon clinking against the mug in the silence. He said you're being paranoid, she continued, that you're letting strangers convince you he's taking advantage of you. I felt a familiar ache in my chest. Not anger, just sadness. Do you believe that? I asked. She hesitated. I don't know what to believe, she said quietly. He's stressed, Mom. The business is hard. Having you here is expensive. I think maybe you don't see how much pressure he's under. There it was. The narrative Andrew had been feeding her. I'm the expensive one. I'm the burden. I'm the source of the pressure. Kelly, I said gently, do you know how much I've contributed to this household in the past 3 years? She shook her head. More than I took out, I said. Significantly more. But I'm not going to argue about it. If you want to believe I'm dependent, that's your choice. But I know what the bank statements say. She stood up, clearly uncomfortable. I didn't come here to fight, she said. Neither did I replied. She called for the kids, and they left a few minutes later. No hug goodbye, just away from the car. I watched them drive away and felt the distance growing. Andrew had rewritten the story, and Kelly had chosen to believe his version, not because it was true, but because it was easier than questioning her brother. I was becoming the outsider in my own family, and the worst part was, I'd seen it coming. New Year's Eve arrived cold and clear. I spent the morning in my suite, listening to the chaos in the main house. Deliveries arriving, furniture being rearranged, Tara shouting instructions to Andrew about where to put the folding tables. Around 3 in the afternoon, I walked over to see if they needed help. The dining room had been transformed. Tables stretched from one end to the other, covered in ivory linens. Place settings lined up in neat rows, crystal glasses catching the winter light through the windows. I counted the settings. 27. Tara was adjusting name cards, moving them around like pieces on a chessboard. I watched her place Andrew's card at the head of the table. Hers right next to him. Kelly and her husband a few seats down. The important guests clustered near the center where conversation would be easiest. Then she picked up one last card. Mine. She walked it to the far end of the table, past the main seating area, past the extra leaves, all the way to the spot next to the swinging door that led to the kitchen. She set it down next to a stack of napkins, half hidden behind a bread basket. She didn't notice me watching, or maybe she did, and she just didn't care. I stood there in the doorway, looking at that place card, and felt something inside me go very quiet and very still. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a space issue. This was a statement. You don't belong at the center anymore. You belong at the margins, close to the exit, easy to ignore. I thought about the documents sitting in Garrison's office, the ones I'd signed weeks ago, the ones I'd told him not to file unless I gave him permission. I thought about the line I'd drawn in my mind, the boundary I'd promised myself I wouldn't let them cross. And I wondered if I was watching them build the bridge to cross it right now. I went back to my suite without saying a word. I showered. I put on a nice dress. I did my hair and my makeup like I was preparing for something important. Because I was preparing to find out if my family would finally show me who they really were, or if they'd prove me wrong and remember I was still part of this. By 6 o'clock, the guests started arriving. I heard car doors slamming, voices greeting each other, laughter echoing through the house. I checked my phone one more time. Garrison's contact sat at the top of my recent messages. If they cross your line again, you let me know. I slipped my phone into my pocket. Then I walked across the yard to the house, opened the door, and stepped into the role they'd written for me. The invisible woman at the far end of the table. The burden they'd invited everyone to see. The dining room was already loud when I walked in. 27 people packed around tables that stretched the length of the room, voices competing, glasses clinking, everyone dressed like they were celebrating something important. I recognized maybe half of them. Cousins I'd sent birthday cards to for years. Andrew's business contacts wearing expensive watches. Tara's family clustered near the center, her mother already holding court about something that made everyone laugh. Nobody looked up when I entered. I found my place card exactly where I'd seen Tara put it hours earlier. Far end of the table, tucked beside the kitchen door, half hidden behind serving platters that hadn't been distributed yet. I sat down. The chair next to me was empty. The chair across from me was empty. I was an island at the end of a table built for connection. Conversations swirled around me, flowing past like I was a rock in a stream. Someone reached past my shoulder to grab the bread basket without saying, "Excuse me." A cousin I used to babysit made eye contact, then looked away quickly like she hadn't seen me at all. Platters of food started making their way down the table. Roasted vegetables, garlic mashed potatoes, prime rib sliced thin and perfect. I watched them pass from hand to hand, person to person, skipping right over the empty space in front of me. Nobody offered me the serving spoon. Nobody asked if I wanted wine. I poured myself water from a pitcher someone had left within reach and tried to swallow the tightness in my throat. Andrew stood at the head of the table, Tara glowing beside him in a dress that probably cost more than my monthly pension. He tapped his glass with a knife, the sharp ting-ting-ting cutting through the noise. The room quieted. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," Andrew said, his voice warm and confident. "This year's been tough. The economy, the competition, all the usual challenges. But we made it through because we have each other. Because we're family." He raised his glass higher. "To family," he said. "To family!" 27 voices echoed. I lifted my water glass along with everyone else, but nobody was looking in my direction when they said it. Their eyes were on Andrew, on Tara, on each other. Not on me. The meal continued. Forks scraped plates. Conversations rose and fell. I ate in silence, chewing food I couldn't taste, watching my family perform togetherness while I sat at the edge of the frame. Then, halfway through the main course, Andrew's voice rose again. "You know," he said, loud enough to carry. "It's been a hell of a year for other reasons, too." The table quieted again, people sensing a story coming. "Running a business is one thing," Andrew continued. "But doing it while supporting family? That's a whole different level." He turned slightly toward my end of the table, just enough that everyone followed his gaze. Having Mom move in, covering her expenses, making sure she's taken care of. It's been a lot. A few relatives nodded sympathetically. Someone murmured something about the struggles of elder care. I felt my pulse quicken. "We love you, Mom," Andrew added, his tone dripping with the kind of patience you use on someone who doesn't understand how much trouble they are. But between the medical bills, the extra costs, the constant needs, it's been a sacrifice. Medical bills I paid for myself, extra costs that came from my own pocket, needs that were never voiced because I'd learned not to ask for anything. But the table didn't know that. They just nodded and murmured and looked at me like I was a weight Andrew had been carrying with grace. I could have corrected him. I could have pulled out my bank statements, shown everyone the receipts, proved exactly who had been supporting whom. But I didn't. I just sat there, watching my son rewrite history in front of witnesses who would remember his version, not the truth. That's when Tara stood up. Her chair scraped back with a screech that cut through the murmur of sympathetic voices. Everyone turned to look at her. She planted one hand flat on the table, the other pointing straight at me like a lawyer addressing a hostile witness. "She's not family," Tara announced, her voice sharp and clear. "She's a burden." The room went silent. 27 faces swung toward me. I felt my hands go numb where they gripped my water glass. Somewhere deep in my chest, that old shame tried to flare up. The same shame I'd carried through every mistake Andrew had ever made, every time someone implied I'd failed as a mother, every time I'd been told I was too much or not enough. I felt it rising, and I crushed it. "Tara," I said quietly, "you've had too much wine." Her face flushed darker. "No," she shot back, louder now. "Everyone tiptoes around this. You all act like she's some kind of saint who sacrificed everything for her kids. But she drained us dry. She moved into our house, took over our lives, our time, our money. We've sacrificed everything, and she just sits there expecting us to be grateful." I watched her. This woman wearing a dress I'd probably helped pay for, standing in a house my money had subsidized, serving food on my credit. And I said nothing, because I wanted to see how far this would go. Andrew stood up beside her. For one brief, foolish second, I thought he was going to stop her. I thought he was going to be the son I'd raised, the one who knew right from wrong, the one who understood loyalty. He wasn't. "She's right," Andrew said, looking directly at me. "You have drained us, Mom. You have no idea what we've done to keep you comfortable. We invited everyone here tonight so they could see what we're dealing with, because in your version of the story, you're always the victim." He picked up his wine glass. "Let's be honest for once," he continued. "Tell everyone how you guilt-tripped us into taking you in. How you manipulated me into that business arrangement. How you've made everything about you while we've been breaking our backs to support you." A cousin at the far end, someone I'd driven to baseball practice 20 years ago, shook his head and muttered, "Unbelievable." Someone else snickered. I looked down the table at Kelly. She was halfway between Andrew and me, eyes locked on her plate, fork frozen in her hand. She'd gone pale. I waited for her to say something. Anything. She didn't. Then Tara's mother started it. Just a whisper at first, barely audible. "Burden." Tara's sister picked it up. "Burden." A few of the younger cousins laughed like it was a joke, and then it caught. "Burden, burden, burden." The chant rolled down the table like a wave. People who barely knew my name were mouthing the word between bites of prime rib I'd indirectly paid for. I watched faces I'd seen at christenings and graduations and weddings, faces that smiled in Christmas card photos, twist into something cruel and careless. I watched my son lean back in his chair and let it happen. I watched my daughter sit frozen, choosing silence over defending me. And I felt something inside me go completely calm. This was the line. They'd just crossed it. Kelly's chair scraped. She stood up, her face tight with embarrassment, and walked toward me. "Come on, Mom," she muttered, her hand closing around my elbow. Not gently, not protectively, like she was removing a problem before it got worse. "You're making it weird. Let's get you home." I stood without resistance. The chanting was already dying down, people turning back to their meals like nothing had happened. Andrew was refilling wine glasses. Tara was laughing at something her mother said. They'd humiliated me in front of 27 people, and they were already moving on. Kelly pushed my coat at me in the foyer, her eyes darting back toward the dining room. "They didn't mean it like that," she said quickly. "Everyone's just had too much wine. They're stressed. Don't take it personally. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw what I'd been refusing to see for months. She was going to choose them. Every single time. I know exactly how they meant it, I said. I buttoned my coat slowly, deliberately, giving her one more chance to say something real. She didn't take it. I walked out into the cold night air. Behind me, the house pulsed with laughter and music, and the sound of people enjoying a party I'd helped fund while calling me dead weight. I stood on the walkway and pulled out my phone. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. I scrolled to Garrison's contact. Our last message was from 3 days ago. If they cross the line again, you let me know. I can file everything on January 2nd. You won't owe them a warning. I typed one word, Garrison. My thumb hovered over the send button for maybe 2 seconds. Then I hit it. The message delivered with a soft whoosh. One word. 6 letters. That's all it took. I wasn't angry. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking with rage or grief or betrayal. I was done. I'd spent 6 months preparing for this moment, hoping I'd never have to use it, praying my family would choose differently. They hadn't. So I made my choice. I walked to my car, started the engine, and drove back to my suite while my family celebrated inside. They had no idea what that single text had just set in motion. They had no idea that in 72 hours, everything they'd built on my back was going to come crashing down. And for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I could breathe. 3 days after New Year's, I sat in Garrison's office while he confirmed what I already knew. I got your text at 11:42 on New Year's Eve, he said, opening a folder in front of him. I started the paperwork the next morning. My hands were folded in my lap, fingers laced together to keep them still. And? I asked. Northside accepted the terms, Garrison said. The resolutions removing your son and daughter-in-law from their officer positions were filed with the Georgia Secretary of State on January 2nd. As of this morning, the state recognizes you as the sole authorized officer of Palmer Home Renovations. He slid a document across the table. Official letterhead. State seal. My name listed as president and registered agent. Notifications went out to the bank this morning, he continued. Also, to the 3 largest vendors your son uses regularly. They've been informed that management has changed and that all future approvals must go through the new ownership structure. I stared at the document, my son's name conspicuously absent from every line. Does Andrew know yet? I asked. Not unless the bank called him, Garrison said. But he will soon. His access to the business accounts was frozen at 9 this morning. Any cards tied to the company will be declined. He won't be able to approve purchases, sign checks, or access funds without authorization from Northside. I felt something twist in my chest. Not regret, just the weight of what I'd done. What happens next? I asked. Garrison leaned back in his chair. Over the next few days, he's going to get calls, he said, from the bank, asking why he's trying to access frozen accounts, from vendors, asking who he needs to route requests through now. Eventually, Northside will send a formal letter explaining that he's been removed from his officer role and offering him a salaried position as a project manager. Will he take it? I asked. Garrison shrugged. Most people in his position don't, he said honestly. The ego takes a hit. Going from owner to employee in your own company is hard to swallow, but that's his decision to make. He pulled out another folder. In the meantime, we need to talk about you, he said. Northside will handle the business side, but you need to finalize your own exit strategy. Where are you going to live? How are you securing your remaining assets? What's your plan for when this goes public? I'd been thinking about that for weeks. I've been looking at condos, I said. Small ones, 2 bedrooms, something I can afford on my pension and the buyout payments. Have you found anything? He asked. There's one about 4 miles from here, I said. Ground floor, near a park. It's available now. Then I'd suggest you move quickly, Garrison said. Once your son realizes what's happened, that house is going to become hostile territory. You don't want to be living in his space when the fallout hits. I nodded. He was right. I knew he was right. But thinking about packing up my suite, about leaving the grandkids' drawings on my fridge and the routines I'd built, made everything feel suddenly, devastatingly real. What about the tax debts? I asked, changing the subject before my resolve could crack. Northside is negotiating a payment plan with the state, Garrison said. Your name will stay on the filings temporarily while the transition completes, but they're assuming financial responsibility. Once the sale finalizes in about 90 days, your name comes off entirely. 90 days. 3 months until I was completely free. And if Andrew fights this? I asked. He can try, Garrison said. But you're the majority owner. You had the legal authority to make these decisions. He signed an operating agreement that gave you that power. He can be angry, but he can't undo it. I left his office an hour later with a stack of documents, a timeline, and a plan. The condo lease would be ready to sign by the end of the week. Northside would send their formal letter to Andrew on January 7th. The first buyout payment would hit my account on January 15th. Everything was in motion, and there was no stopping it now. Over the next few days, I moved through my routines like I was underwater. Everything felt muffled and slow and strange. I toured the condo on a gray Wednesday afternoon. It was small but bright, with windows that faced east and a little balcony big enough for a chair and some potted plants. The landlord was a woman in her 50s who asked gentle questions about why I was moving. Change of circumstances, I said, and she didn't push. I signed the lease that afternoon. I started packing that night. Not everything, just the things I knew I'd need in the first few days. Clothes, toiletries, my favorite books. I packed them into boxes I'd picked up from the grocery store, stacking them in my closet where nobody would see them. Andrew and Tara hadn't come by my suite since New Year's Eve. The grandkids hadn't either. It was like I'd already disappeared from their lives. I wondered if they'd even notice when I was gone. On January 6th, Garrison called. "Your son tried to access the business account this morning," he said. The bank blocked him and referred him to Northside. He also got a call from his biggest supplier asking who to send invoices to now. "Has he called you?" I asked. "Not yet," Garrison said. "But he will, or he'll call you." My phone stayed silent all day. I finished packing that night. My suite looked strange with half my belongings boxed up, empty spaces on the shelves where photos used to sit. I wondered what Andrew and Tara were thinking right now. If they were confused, angry, scared. I wondered if they'd made the connection yet. I wondered if they remembered the way they'd chanted at me 3 nights ago while I sat at the far end of their table, silent and invisible. Probably not. People who humiliate you rarely remember the details. They just remember that you were supposed to take it quietly. I sat on my couch, surrounded by boxes, my phone in my hand, waiting for the calls I knew were coming. Fear and relief tangled together in my chest, so tightly I couldn't tell which one was stronger. But underneath both, there was something else. Certainty. I'd done the right thing. And whatever happened next, I wouldn't be carrying their weight anymore. The first call came at 5:03 in the morning. I was awake already, lying in bed watching the dark sky outside my window start to lighten. Sleep had been hard to come by since New Year's Eve. My phone lit up on the nightstand, buzzing angrily. "Andrew." I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started again. I watched it vibrate across the wood surface, his name flashing over and over in the gray dawn light. 5 calls in 3 minutes. Then the texts started coming in rapid succession. "Call me right now." "What did you do?" "The bank says I don't have access. What the hell is going on?" "Mom, I know you're awake. Call me." I turned the phone face down and got out of bed. By the time I'd made coffee and toast, there were 17 missed calls and 23 texts. I scrolled through them while I ate breakfast at my small kitchen table, reading each one like I was reviewing evidence instead of messages from my son. They started confused, then angry, then desperate. Someone from Northside called me. They said they're taking over the company. "Did you do this?" "You can't just steal my business, Mom. I'll fight this. Please call me back. We can fix this. Just call me." I deleted nothing. I replied to nothing. I finished my breakfast, washed my dishes, and got dressed for my morning water aerobics class at the community center. At 7:11, Tara started. Her messages were different. Sharper. Meaner. My card was declined at the grocery store. "Do you know how humiliating that is? You did this. You're destroying our family because you couldn't handle one bad night. The kids are asking why Grandma is being mean to Daddy. What am I supposed to tell them? I hope you're happy. You've ruined everything we built." I put the phone in my gym bag and drove to the community center. The water was warm, the exercises familiar and rhythmic. I moved through the routine surrounded by women my age, none of them knowing that my phone was exploding in the locker room while I stretched and kicked and floated. For the first time in 3 years, I wasn't rushing to solve someone else's crisis. I wasn't checking my phone between sets to see if Andrew needed money. I wasn't rearranging my schedule because Tara needed emergency childcare. I was just existing in my own space, on my own time, doing something that was mine. It felt like breathing after being underwater. After class, I checked my phone in the parking lot. 49 messages total from Andrew, 20 from Tara, 3 from Kelly. I drove home without responding to any of them. At 2 in the afternoon, Garrison called. "The first payment from Northside cleared this morning," he said. "Check your new account." I pulled up my banking app while he stayed on the line. There it was, a deposit of $12,000. "That's the first installment," Garrison explained. "You'll get monthly payments over the next 5 years. It won't be the full $180,000 you invested, but it's significantly more than you'd recover if the company collapsed under your son's management." "And the tax debts?" I asked. "Northside is handling them," he confirmed. "They're negotiating with the state right now. Your name is still technically on the filings, but they've assumed financial responsibility. You're shielded." I sat in my car staring at that number. $12,000. Money that was mine. That couldn't be drained by emergencies that weren't really emergencies. That wouldn't disappear into owner draws and kitchen remodels and imported cheese. "Mrs. Palmer," Garrison said, "are you still there?" "I'm here," I said quietly. "Thank you. You did the hard part," he replied. "I just filed the paperwork." We hung up. I sat there for a long moment, then drove to the condo I'd leased. I spent the afternoon measuring windows for curtains and planning where my furniture would go, building something new instead of propping up something broken. At 6:30, my phone rang again. Kelly. I almost didn't answer, but she was still my daughter. And unlike Andrew, she hadn't called 17 times. She'd sent 3 messages, each one shorter and more uncertain than the last. I answered. "Mom," she said, and her voice cracked immediately. "Please tell me what's happening. Andrew is losing his mind. He says you sold the company. He says you took everything from him." "I didn't take anything from him," I said calmly. "I protected what was mine." "But the house," she said, and I could hear tears in her voice now. "He says they might lose the house, that the bank is asking questions, that everything's falling apart." "The house was collateral for business loans he took out," I said. "I didn't put it up, he did. If the bank calls the loan because management changed, that's a consequence of how he ran the business, not what I did to protect myself." "Mom, he's my brother," Kelly said. "He's scared. Tara's scared. Can't you just undo this? Can't you fix it?" And there it was. The same request I'd been hearing my whole life. Fix it. Smooth it over. Make the hard thing go away so everyone else can be comfortable. "No," I said. The word hung in the air between us. "What do you mean, no?" Kelly asked. "I mean, I'm not fixing this," I said. "I'm not undoing it. I'm not stepping in to save your brother from consequences he created. I did that for 30 years, Kelly. I'm done." "But this is extreme," she said. "One bad dinner and you destroy his whole business?" "One bad dinner?" I repeated, feeling something cold settle in my chest. "Kelly, do you remember what happened at that dinner?" She was quiet. "Do you remember your brother telling 27 people that I drained him dry?" I continued. "Do you remember Tara calling me a burden? Do you remember the chant?" "They were drunk," she said weakly. "It got out of hand." "And you?" I said, my voice harder now. "Put your hands on me," and pushed me toward the door. "You told me I was making it weird. You chose their version of the story before you even asked for mine." I heard her breathing on the other end, unsteady and shallow. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "For what?" I asked. "For that night? Or for everything that came before it? I don't understand." "Your brother has been lying to you," I said. "He told you I was dependent on him, that I cost him money, that he was supporting me out of the goodness of his heart. Did you ever ask to see the receipts, Kelly? Did you ever question his version?" "He's my brother," she said again, like that explained everything. "And I'm your mother," I replied. "But you believed him when he said I was the problem. You didn't ask questions. You just accepted the narrative that made me the villain." There was a long silence. "What really happened?" Kelly asked finally, her voice small. So I told her. I told her about the $180,000 I invested, about the tax notices with my name on them, about the owner draws Andrew took while skipping payroll deposits, about the money I'd poured into their household while being told I was expensive to maintain. I told her about Garrison, about Rebecca the forensic accountant, about the spreadsheets that showed exactly where my retirement savings had gone. I told her everything Andrew hadn't. When I finished, she was crying. "I didn't know," she said. "Mom, I swear I didn't know." "You didn't ask," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." "What do I do now?" she asked. "That's up to you," I said. "If you want a relationship with me, it starts with a real apology. Not "I'm sorry you're upset," not "I'm sorry things got out of hand." A real acknowledgement that you chose the crowd over me when I needed you to choose differently. "I'm sorry," she said, and this time her voice was steady. "I'm sorry I didn't defend you. I'm sorry I believed his story without checking. I'm sorry I pushed you out that door instead of standing up for you. You deserved better from me." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of those words settle. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Can I still see you?" Kelly asked. "Can I bring the kids?" "Yes," I said. "But not at Andrew's house. I'm moving into my own place next week. You're welcome there any time. The kids are always welcome. But I'm done pretending everything's fine when it's not." "That's fair," she said. We talked for another 20 minutes. About the kids' school projects. About her job. About normal things that felt like building a bridge back to each other. When we finally hung up, my phone was quiet. Andrew had stopped calling. Tara had stopped texting. The panic had passed, and now they were regrouping, planning their next move. But I wasn't waiting to see what that would be. I was moving forward, into a space that was mine, with boundaries that were firm, and for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't apologizing for it. 4 months later, I was sitting on my balcony with morning coffee, watching robins fight over the bird feeder I'd hung from the railing. My condo was small but mine. 2 bedrooms, exactly like I'd planned. One for me, one for when the grandkids stayed over. The living room had my old couch, the bookcase I'd brought from Dayton all those years ago, and a new rug I'd picked out myself without asking anyone's opinion. The kitchen had a table big enough for 4. The walls had photos I'd chosen. The silence had peace in it instead of tension. I'd been here since mid-January, and every morning I woke up without dread, felt like a small victory. Northside had taken over Palmer home renovations completely. They'd brought in new project managers, implemented actual accounting systems, and started rebuilding relationships with vendors. Andrew had burned through careless payments and broken promises. Andrew had refused their offer of a salaried position. "I'm not working for strangers in my own company," he'd told Kelly, who'd told me during one of her Saturday visits. So he'd started over from scratch, picking up odd jobs with a friend's crew, smaller projects, less control, no shine. The reputation he'd spent years building had cracked when word got out about the management change. People in that industry talked. They knew when someone lost their business because they couldn't manage the books. Tara had taken a job answering phones at a real estate office. Her social media had gone quiet, the champagne and imported cheese replaced by vague posts about growth and testing seasons. Their house, the one with the remodeled kitchen and the dining room that could seat 27, had gone on the market in March. Kelly had texted me the listing. Not to gloat, not to make me feel guilty, just because hiding it felt pointless. They'd moved into a rental in April. Smaller, cheaper, closer to the kids' school, less room for performances. I felt sad about it sometimes. Not guilty, just sad. Sad that Andrew had been so close to having something real and had destroyed it through arrogance and entitlement. Sad that he'd chosen to see me as the villain instead of looking at his own choices. But I didn't feel responsible for fixing it. That was new. Kelly came by most Saturdays now with the kids. We'd make pancakes in my little kitchen, then walk to the park down the street. The kids would climb on the playground while Kelly and I sat on a bench and talked about real things. She'd apologized 3 more times since that first phone call, each time more specific, more honest. "I should have asked questions, instead of just believing him," she'd said during her second visit. "I took the easy path, and that meant you paid the price." I'd accepted her apologies, not because they erased what happened, but because I could see she meant them, and because I wanted my daughter in my life, even if the path back wasn't simple. The grandkids didn't understand the details. They just knew Grandma had a new place with a balcony where they could watch birds and a second bedroom where they could have sleepovers. They didn't need to know about frozen bank accounts and legal filings and chants at dinner tables. They just needed to know I was still here. I'd started volunteering at the library again, same branch where I'd seen the flyer for Garrison's seminar all those months ago. I shelved books on Wednesday mornings and helped patrons find what they needed. I'd also joined a walking group, 6 women, all within a few years of my age, who met at the park 3 times a week. We walked 2 miles while talking about everything and nothing: recipes, doctor appointments, grandkids, books we were reading. None of them knew my story. They just knew I was Judith, the woman who always remembered everyone's coffee order when we stopped at the cafe afterward. I wasn't defined by what I could pay for anymore. I wasn't the woman funding someone else's dreams while being called a burden. I was just myself, making choices, setting boundaries, living on terms I decided. Some nights I thought about Andrew. I remembered him as a little boy, the way he'd run to me after school, bursting with stories, the way he'd helped me bake cookies at Christmas, flour everywhere, more dough eaten than baked. I remembered the teenager who'd tested every boundary, who'd slammed doors and shouted that I didn't understand anything. I remembered the young man who'd called me crying when his first business idea failed, and I'd told him failure wasn't the end, just information. I'd loved him through all of it. I still loved him now, even though love didn't mean what I used to think it meant. Love didn't mean carrying someone through consequences they'd earned. It didn't mean sacrificing myself so he could avoid discomfort. It didn't mean accepting humiliation because walking away felt too hard. Love could exist alongside boundaries. I just wished he'd learned that before it was too late to rebuild what we'd lost. But that was his journey, not mine. I'd done my part. I'd raised him. I'd supported him. I'd given him chances long after most people would have walked away. And when he crossed the line I'd drawn, I'd protected myself. Not with cruelty. Not with revenge. Just with one text, one name, one decision to stop carrying weight that was never mine to carry alone. On New Year's Eve, 27 people had watched my son and his wife treat me like an outsider at a table I'd helped fund. They'd chanted insults while I sat silent at the far end, invisible and dismissed. I'd smiled. I'd walked out. And I'd sent one word to a man who'd spent months preparing an exit I'd hoped I'd never need. 1 week later, Andrew's phone had exploded at dawn. Tara's cards had been declined. Kelly had begged me not to do this, but I'd already done it, because I wasn't the burden they'd made me out to be. I was the foundation they'd built their lives on and then forgotten to thank. I didn't destroy my family that night. I just stopped letting them destroy me. If you've ever been called a burden by people who were leaning on you the whole time, I see you. If you've ever had to choose between your peace and someone else's comfort, if you've ever walked away from people who rewrote your story to make themselves the hero, drop a comment below. Tell me your story. You're not alone in this. And if this resonated with you, if you stayed all the way to the end, do me a favor. Hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Because there are more stories like this. More voices that deserve to be heard. More people who need to know that protecting yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. I'm Judith Palmer. I'm 69 years old. And I'm no longer anyone's burden. I'm just free.